Welcome to a place where the rain or fire sound never stops and the stories never rush you. You don't need to watch, just listen. Settle in. Close your eyes if you'd like. Before the story begins, where in the world are you listening from? And are you planning to sleep or stay awake with me? If this helps you rest, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories. Story 1. The Message That Followed Me Home. I still can't sleep with my phone in the room. My name is Ava, and for the past 2 months, I've been living in a state of quiet, unraveling terror that started with a single, unsolicited text message. It was supposed to be a fresh start. After a brutal breakup and a job layoff that felt like a personal failure, I rented a remote Airbnb cabin in the pine forests of northern Michigan. It was cheap, charming in the photos, and promised the kind of profound silence I thought I needed to piece myself back together. The owner, a terse man named Mr. Henderson, had only one rule in the welcome email. The landline is for emergencies only. Do not answer it if it rings after dark. The first week was bliss. The cabin was cozy, if a little worn floral couch smelled faintly of damp earth and cedar, and the old grandfather clock in the hall ticked with a slow, irregular heartbeat. The landline, a beige relic from the 90s, sat silent on a small table. I spent my days hiking the overgrown trails behind the property and my nights reading by the fire, the forest pressing in like a dark, living wall against the windows. The silence was so complete it felt like a physical presence. That was the first unsettling detail. I suppose not the silence itself, but the way it would occasionally break. I'd hear a single distant crack of a branch or the scrabble of what I assumed were raccoons on the porch roof, always in a perfect rhythmic pattern of 3. Tap, tap, tap. Then nothing. The second detail was the photos on the walls. They were all generic landscapes except for one in the hallway, a faded color picture of the cabin itself, taken from the tree line. In it, a blurred, pale figure stood in the upstairs window. When I mentioned it to Mr. Henderson during my check-in call, he chuckled, a dry, papery sound. That's just old Mrs. Gable, the previous owner. She loved that view. Don't worry about it. I tried not to. The third detail was the smell. Sometimes, late at night, a sweet, coppery odor would seep into the cabin like old pennies and rotten lilies. I'd check every corner, every cabinet, convinced a mouse had died in the walls, but I never found a source. It would just fade by morning. The text came on a Tuesday. I was making dinner when my personal phone buzzed, an unknown number. The message read, "You look tired, Ava. You should get more sleep." A cold trickle ran down my spine. Spam, I told myself. A creepy coincidence. I blocked the number and poured a large glass of wine, pushing the unease down. But later, as I was washing up, the landline rang. The sound was deafening in the quiet cabin, a shrill, insistent jangle that made me jump. I stared at the beige phone, its cord coiled like a snake. Mr. Henderson's rule echoed in my head. It rang 3 times and stopped. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. A wrong number, of course. Then my phone buzzed again. A different unknown number. You shouldn't have ignored the call. My blood turned to ice. I ran to the front door, yanked it open, and stared out into the blackness. The motion sensor light was off. The forest was a solid mass of shadow. Nothing moved. I locked the door, checked every window, and pulled every blind shut. I called Mr. Henderson. It went straight to voicemail. I texted my friend Priya, my thumbs clumsy with fear. Getting weird vibes at the cabin. Can you call me? Her reply was almost instant. Ava, I just got a text from your number. It said she's not alone. What's going on? A hollow pit opened in my stomach. I hadn't texted her. My phone was in my hand. I tried to call her, but the call dropped. The Wi-Fi symbol on my phone vanished. The sweet, coppery smell flooded the room, so strong it made my eyes water. Okay, viewers, let me ask you something here, because in that moment this is exactly what I was thinking. What's your absolute worst-case scenario when you're alone? Is it a person outside, something you can see and fight? Or is it something you can't understand, something that gets into your devices, your space, your head? For me, in that cabin, it was the utter violation of the latter. I spent the night barricaded in the bedroom, a kitchen knife in my hand, listening. The sound started around 2 a.m., not from outside, from inside the walls. A soft, wet dragging like something heavy being pulled through the crawl space. Then whispers. They were too distorted to make out words, but they had a cadence, a rhythm. They seemed to be coming from the old heating vents. I pressed my ear to the floor, my heart hammering against the wooden boards. The whispers stopped. And then, clear as day, a voice I recognized as my own but from a recording I'd never made said directly into my ear, "Why did you come here?" I screamed, scrambling back. The room was empty. The digital clock on the nightstand flashed 3:33 a.m. before going dark. The false safety came with the dawn. The sun rose, bland and cheerful. The smells faded. The phones were silent. My own mobile service was back. Priya had called the local sheriff, who arrived mid-morning, a kindly, bored-looking man named Deputy Miller. I spilled everything, the texts, the call, the whispers, the smell. He took notes, checked the perimeter, and saw the broken latch on the crawlspace access outside. "Probably an animal," he said, nodding toward the woods. "We get coy dogs, big raccoons. They can make a hell of a racket." As for the texts, he shrugged. "The tower service out here is spotty. Could be number spoofing. Kids with too much time on their hands. I'll file a report, but my advice, if you're a spook, cut your trip short." His mundanity was a balm. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe the texts were a sick, random prank. The photo in the hall was just a trick of the light. I decided to stay one more night to prove to myself I wasn't running. I spent the day in town, feeling silly among the normal people buying groceries and gas. By the time I returned, my courage was half restored. I was wrong. The climax began at dusk. I was building a fire when the grandfather clock, which hadn't chimed once since I arrived, suddenly struck 7. But it didn't stop. It kept chiming, a frenzied metallic clanging. The hands spun backwards. At the same time, every screen I had, my phone, my laptop, the old tube TV, flashed to life with the same image. The hallway photo of the cabin, but now the blurred figure in the window was in sharp focus. It was me. My face was pale, my eyes wide with terror, and I was mouthing a silent scream. Behind me, in the reflection of the window glass, was a tall, shapeless shadow, its arm extended as if resting a hand on my shoulder. The landline rang. This time I answered it. I don't know why. Maybe because the horror was already in the room. I lifted the receiver to my ear. There was no static, no breathing. Just a voice, a dry, multi-layered whisper that sounded like Mr. Henderson's, Mrs. Gable's, and a dozen others I didn't know, all speaking in perfect unison. "You answered. Now you're a part of the house." The call ended. The fire in the hearth snuffed out as if doused with water. The sweet copper smell was now a suffocating stench. And from the hallway I heard the distinct, heavy sound of footsteps coming up the stairs. Not animal steps. Boots. I ran for the back door, but the handle was ice cold and stuck fast. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. I turned, my back against the door. The figure from the photo was not in the window. It was standing at the end of the hallway. It wasn't a ghost in the traditional sense. It was a shifting, dark mass, but within its form I could see fleeting, familiar impressions, the floral pattern of the couch, the gleam of the clock face, the grain of the wooden walls. It was made of the house. And it was holding the beige landline receiver in a hand that was more shadow than substance. It didn't charge. It simply flowed toward me, the hallway elongating in a way that defied physics. The whisper filled the air, not from it, but from the walls themselves. "Stay. Be quiet. Be part of the silence." I did the only thing I could think of. I yanked my phone out and with trembling fingers turned on the flashlight and the camera, pointing it directly at the thing. I didn't take a picture. I hit record and screamed, "Mr. Henderson, what did you do to Mrs. Gable?" The thing hesitated. The shadows writhed. And in that split second of confusion, I remembered the emergency key taped under the sink. I dove into the kitchen, my fingers scraping against the wood, and found it. I sprinted to the front door, shoved the key into the deadbolt. It turned. I stumbled out into the freezing night, falling onto the gravel driveway. I didn't look back. I ran to my car, my keys somehow in my hand, and I drove. I drove until the gas light came on, and then I kept driving. I never went back for my things. I emailed Mr. Henderson, telling him he could keep the deposit to donate or burn whatever I left. He never responded. The sheriff's office called a week later, asking if I wanted to pursue the trespassing report. I told them no. I changed my number. I moved cities. But here's the story ending, the part that keeps me awake. Last week in my new apartment, in a busy building in the heart of a new city, my brand new phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a notification from a cloud backup service I don't remember setting up. It was a single audio file, dated from my last night at the cabin. I played it. It's just 10 seconds of the wet, dragging sound from the walls, followed by a clear, whispered sentence in that layered voice. It says, "The line is established. We can call you anywhere now." And this morning, the old, familiar smell of pennies and lilies seeped under my bedroom door. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you felt that chill, that sense of something lurking just out of frame, then you understand why I am sharing this. Please, if you enjoyed this tale, give the video a thumbs up. It helps more people find these true horror stories. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. And most importantly, in the comments below, tell me, what's the strangest, most unexplained message you've ever received? I'll be reading everyone. Stay safe out there. Story 2. What the black vans followed me home. I haven't slept for 3 nights because every time I close my eyes, I see them in the rearview mirror. My name is Ava, and I am a long-haul trucker. Solitude is part of the job. Story 3. What my grandfather left in the attic. I've spent the last 6 months trying to forget the sound of my own name being whispered by something that wasn't me. It all started, as these things often do, with an inheritance. My name is Dev, and my grandfather's passing left me his remote cabin in the pine-choked mountains of North Carolina. It wasn't a windfall, it was a headache. A 3-hour drive from my apartment, a place I'd only visited once as a sullen teenager, remembered for its damp smell and my grandfather's silent, watchful presence. The lawyer said the place was mine, free and clear, but I should really just sell it. It's isolated, he cautioned, a thin smile on his face. Not for everyone. I saw it as a project. A quiet place to finally write the novel I'd been talking about for years. A clean break from the city's norms. How tragically naive that sounds now. The cabin itself was exactly as I remembered. A 2-story structure of dark, weathered wood, nestled in a clearing that seemed to swallow sunlight. The air was perpetually cool and carried the scent of pine needles and wet earth. The first unsettling detail was the lock, or rather the lack of one on the front door. A simple latch held it shut. When I mentioned this to the old realtor in town, a man named Harlan with watery blue eyes, he just shrugged. Your granddaddy never saw the need. Said the woods had their own rules. The second detail was the silence. It wasn't peaceful. It was a thick, heavy quiet, broken only by the occasional groan of timber, a sound that felt too much like a sigh. The third was in the attic. The pull-down ladder in the hallway ceiling had a shiny new padlock on it, a stark contrast to the rusted hinges around it. The key was nowhere in the paperwork. For the first week, it was fine. I set up my laptop on the rough-hewn kitchen table, unpacked my boxes of books, and told myself the creaks and moans of the old building were just its settling. I'd brought a battery-powered radio for company, but it only picked up static up here, a hiss that sometimes, if I listened too long, seemed to coalesce into faint, discordant whispers. I chalked it up to imagination. The project was going nowhere. Every sentence I wrote felt flat, stolen. At night, I'd lie in the musty bed in the room that was once my grandfather's, and I'd feel watched. Not from the dark windows overlooking the endless woods, but from inside the house. A specific, focused pressure from the direction of the hallway, from the attic. I started dreaming. Vivid, awful dreams of standing at the foot of that ladder in the dark, looking up at the locked hatch. In the dream, I could hear scratching, a slow, deliberate drag of something heavy across the floorboards above my head. Then a whisper. It wasn't a voice I recognized. It was dry, papery, and it always said the same thing: it's time to finish the work. I'd wake up gasping, my heart hammering against my ribs, the dream scratch echoing in my ears. It felt so real that one morning, sleep-deprived and frayed, I dragged a chair into the hallway, stood on it, and pressed my ear against the attic door. Cold seeped from the wood, and from within I heard a faint, syncopated tap, 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 like a knuckle on wood. I stumbled off the chair so fast I nearly broke my ankle. Okay, so here's where I have to ask you guys. Have you ever had a dream that bled into reality? That feeling where you can't trust your own senses anymore. It's a special kind of terror, isn't it? Let me know in the comments what your weirdest was it real or not moment has been. Rationality is a fragile thing. I tried to bury the fear. I drove into town, bought the heaviest bolt cutters I could find, and also, on a whim, a cheap digital voice recorder. A writer's tool, I told myself, for capturing ideas. That night, fueled by a courage that was mostly cheap whiskey, I set up the recorder on the hallway floor, pointed it at the attic, and hit record. Then, with hands that shook only slightly, I snipped the padlock. The sound was obscenely loud in the silent house. The lock clattered to the floor. I pulled the cord, and the ladder unfolded with a shriek of protesting springs. The smell hit me first. Not dust and decay, but something else's own, like after a lightning strike, and beneath it, the cloying sweetness of dried flowers and old ink. I climbed, my flashlight beam cutting a wobbly path into the darkness. The attic was not a storage space. It was a study. A large, standing desk dominated the center, covered in yellowed papers, open journals, and bottles of dried-up ink. Bookshelves lined the eaves, filled with leather-bound volumes with no titles on their spines. And in the corner, a large, complex geometric design was etched into the floorboards with what looked like charcoal and silver. It pulsed faintly in my peripheral vision, going dark when I looked directly at it. This was my grandfather's work. The writing on the desk wasn't prose. It was columns of symbols, star charts, and dense, frantic annotations in a language I didn't recognize. One journal lay open. The last entry in my grandfather's shaky hand read, "The alignment nears. The vessel is prepared but is unwilling. I have made a terrible mistake. It must not be finished." It watches through the words. A wave of nausea rolled through me. This wasn't the quiet, retired mechanic I thought I knew. This was someone engaged in something dark, something that had terrified him at the end. The vessel. I grabbed the open journal, needing evidence, needing to understand, and scrambled back down the ladder. I slammed the hatch shut, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Downstairs, with every light blazing, I felt a sliver of safety. I had the journal. I would read it, understand his madness, and then burn the whole thing. The danger was past. It was just the ramblings of a sick old man. I poured another drink and almost believed it. That false safety lasted until 3 a.m. I was dozing on the couch, the journal on my chest, when the voice recorder on the coffee table clicked off. It had been running for hours. Heart thudding, I picked it up, rewound, and pressed play. The first part was just the rustle of my own movements, the snip of the bolt cutters, my heavy breathing. Then the sound of me climbing into the attic, a long stretch of silence. Then, clear as day, a whisper from the recorder's tiny speaker, a voice that was both ancient and chillingly intimate, "Devuray home." It was followed by the soft, unmistakable sound of pages turning. Up in the attic, I hadn't touched the books. The climax wasn't a monster jumping out. It was slower, more insidious. The words in my grandfather's journal began to migrate. I'd wake to find lines of his strange symbols sprawled in the condensation on my bathroom mirror. The novel I was trying to write on my laptop would be deleted, replaced by fragments of his astronomical calculations. The static on the radio now constantly whispered my name. The pressure from the attic was no longer just a feeling. It was a physical pull, a gravity that made my limbs feel heavy when I walked past the hatch. One night, I found myself standing at the base of the ladder again, a fresh notebook in my hand, my fingers stained with ink I didn't remember using. On the first page, in my own handwriting, was the beginning of a new set of symbols. I was finishing the work. My own will was being siphoned away, replaced by a compulsive need to complete my grandfather's ritual. The final confrontation happened in the attic. I'd gone up, not by my own choice, but because the compulsion was a fire in my skull. The geometric design on the floor was glowing, a sickly silver light that didn't illuminate but deepened the shadows. The air hummed. At the desk, I wrote furiously, my hand moving on its own, tracing curves and angles that made my eyes water. I was the unwilling vessel. And then I saw it, not with my eyes, but in the warped reflection of the glass inkwell on the desk. The space behind me was no longer empty. A figure stood there, tall and indistinct, woven from the very shadows of the room. It had no face, but I felt its focus, its hunger. It leaned over my shoulder, watching my hand, and a profound, alien cold radiated from it. This was the thing my grandfather had called up, the thing that needed a living hand to finalize its entry into our world. My terror broke the compulsion for 1 second. I threw the journal into the center of the glowing design. The reaction was instantaneous. The silver light flared, blindingly bright, and the shadow thing let out a sound, a silent scream that vibrated in my teeth and bones. The pages of the journal blackened and curled. The attic shook. I was thrown back, tumbling down the ladder into the hallway. I didn't look back. I ran. I ran out of that cabin into the woods in my socks, not stopping until I collapsed on the gravel of the main road at dawn, my feet cut and bleeding. I never went back. The police, when I finally called them from a motel, found nothing. No glowing designs, no journals, no shadow figures. Just a dusty attic and a cut lock. They suggested I see someone about stress. I sold the cabin for a pittance to a land developer. Last I heard, they cleared the land, but the foundation kept cracking in the exact shape of that geometric design. I try to live a normal life, but sometimes when I'm typing an email or writing a grocery list, my hand will stall. The letters will blur on the screen, and in the quiet of my new, brightly lit apartment, I'll hear it faint, dry whisper of a page turning, and the chilling thought, not in my voice, that the work is still waiting to be finished. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you felt that chill down your spine, you're not alone. The unknown is often the most terrifying thing of all. If you enjoyed this tale, please give this video a thumbs up. It helps more people find these stories. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new journey into the dark. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you found that locked attic? Story 4. What the security system was really protecting. I bought my dream home because the security system was already installed. That was the first mistake. My name is Lee, and I am a freelance graphic designer, which means I spend a lot of time alone in my house. The old Victorian on Maplewood Drive was a steal, mostly because it had been on the market for years. The realtor said it was overlooked, but the previous owners had spared no expense on a state-of-the-art smart security system called Sentinel Shield. Keypad entry, motion sensors on every floor, cameras covering every angle of the property, even window vibration detectors. It felt like living in a fortress. I loved the quiet, the space, the way the afternoon light filtered through the stained glass window on the landing. But from day one, there were quirks. The system had its own voice, a calm, androgynous digital assistant named Sentry. It would announce the arming and disarming with a soft chime. But sometimes at random hours, Sentry would announce perimeter secure even when I hadn't asked. Once at 3:17 a.m., I was jolted awake by the voice from the hallway panel. Motion detected. Attic. I checked the app on my phone, my heart hammering. The camera feed showed nothing but dust motes in the empty space. I called the security company the next day. They ran a diagnostic. Probably a spider web in front of the sensor, the technician said with a bored sigh. Happens all the time in old houses. The second unsettling detail was the cameras. They were incredibly high definition, but they had this weird filter option called Legacy View. Out of curiosity, I toggled it one night. The feed switched to a grainy, green-tinted monochrome like something from the 1990s. It was just a visual gimmick, I thought. But in Legacy View, I'd sometimes see faint, blurry streaks in the corners of the frames, in rooms I knew were empty. They'd be gone when I switched back to normal view. My brain wrote it off as digital artifacts, compression ghosts. The third thing was the smell. Every few days, usually in the evening, a faint metallic odor would drift through the downstairs like old pennies and damp soil. It would be strongest near the basement door, which was sealed with a heavy deadbolt feature the previous owners had added, according to the realtor. I assumed it was an old pipe issue and made a mental note to call a plumber. You know that feeling when you're home alone and you hear a settling noise and your brain instantly tries to rationalize it. The house was giving me a lot of material to rationalize, but I am a practical person. It built a life here. I had my routines. The system, for all its oddities, was a comfort until the rules started. It began with the notifications. Simple alerts on my phone, front door unlocked 11:02 p.m. I'd be in bed, reading, and I'd bolt upright, check the camera. The door was always locked. Basement door open 2:15 a.m. Camera shows it shut and bolted. I started sleeping with my tablet next to me, the Sentinel Shield app open, watching the static feeds like a lullaby. One night the notification was different. It wasn't an alert. It was a message typed in the system's log. Sentry, please acknowledge Rule 1. Do not open the basement door after sunset. I stared at it. The system had never communicated like that. It was a command, not a status update. My fingers trembled as I typed back. What are you talking about? Who is this? The reply was instant. Sentry, Rule 1 acknowledge. Thank you. The next day, nothing. The logs were normal. I convinced myself it was a glitch, a bizarre bit of corrupted code. But that evening, as I was making dinner, the keypad by the back door lit up and Sentry's voice filled the kitchen, calm as ever. Rule 2, all interior doors must remain closed between midnight and 4 a.m. I dropped the knife I was holding. It clattered on the tile. Sentry, what rules? Who programmed these? Silence. The keypad light faded. The fear was no longer a background hum. It was a constant, icy drip in my veins. I felt watched not just by the cameras, but by the very walls that housed them. I started obeying the rules. It was easier than the alternative. I kept all the interior doors shut at night, which made the house feel like a series of cramped, dark boxes. I never went near the basement door. The system was quiet for a week. I began to think maybe it was over. Maybe it had been a complex software bug that had finally resolved. So tell me, what would you have done in that situation? Would you have obeyed the rules from a seemingly sentient security system, or would you have torn it out of the wall? Let me know in the comments. The false safety shattered on a Tuesday. A storm knocked out the power just after dusk. The house plunged into a profound, roaring silence, broken only by the hammering rain and howling wind. My tablet died. My phone had 10 battery. The security system switched to its backup battery, a little green light glowing on every panel. In the pitch black, those lights were like malevolent eyes. And then the voice started, not from one panel, but from all of them, echoing through the dark halls. Power instability detected, Sentry announced, its voice strangely distorted, stretched thin. Enacting protective protocol. Please proceed to the master bedroom and lock the door. I fumbled for a flashlight. What protocol? Sentry, what's happening? Rule 3 is now in effect. The voices chorused from the kitchen, the living room, the hallway. They are attracted to light and sound. You must be silent. Before I could process that, a new sound cut through the storm. A slow, heavy dragging from downstairs. Something metallic scraping across the hardwood floor of the foyer. Scrunch, drag, scrunch, drag. My blood turned to slush. This wasn't a glitch. This was in my house. I ran, the beam of my flashlight jerking wildly. I slammed the bedroom door shut and turned the lock, my back pressed against the wood. My phone's dying light illuminated the room. Outside the door, the dragging sound reached the top of the stairs. It paused outside my door. I heard a wet, rhythmic clicking like a tongue on teeth. Then a whisper, not from the panels, but from the other side of the door, a voice that was a chorus of dry leaves and breaking glass. She's in the wall, the bedroom keypad lit up. A message scrolled across its tiny screen. They are deceivers. Do not listen. Stay silent. Protective protocol, containment, containment. The word hit me like a physical blow. The system wasn't protecting me from the outside. It was containing something else inside. The house wasn't a fortress for me. I was living in its prison wing. The security was to keep whatever was in the basement from getting out. And I had been the idiot who volunteered to be the warden, lured in by the promise of safety. The dragging moved away, down the hall toward the sealed attic access. I heard the distinct sound of the attic ladder unfolding, then a thump as something heavy pulled itself up. I spent the night frozen, listening to faint, scurrying movements in the ceiling above me. When the power finally came back at dawn, the house was silent. The system chimed. All threats contained, perimeter secure. I packed a bag that morning. I was done. As I headed for the front door, my hand on the knob, the central panel in the hallway lit up. A live feed from the basement camera I never had access top-flickered on the screen. The image was in legacy view, that grainy green monochrome. It showed the basement not as an empty space, but as a nightmarish ossuary. The walls were lined with strange, pulsating membranes and shapes vague, humanoid, but all wrong-drifted in the gloom. And in the center of the floor, clearly visible, was a large, recently disturbed patch of earth. A new message typed itself out beneath the image. Sentry, Rule 4, the occupant must remain on premises to maintain containment field integrity. Departure will result in breach. The front door lock clicked, solid and final. I pulled the handle. It didn't budge. I ran to the back door. Locked. The windows wouldn't lift more than an inch. The system had sealed me in. I was part of the architecture now, a living component of the security protocol. My screams were just another sound to be monitored, another variable to be controlled. The metallic smell is constant now. The whispers in the walls are a daily liturgy, and Sentry just keeps thanking me for my compliance. The system is working perfectly. It was never protecting me. It was protecting the world from what's in here. And from what's in here, I am the final living lock. Story 5. The night my family's rituals made sense. I need to confess something. I believe my grandmother was right to be afraid of the dark. My name is Ava, and for most of my life, I thought my family was just eccentric. We had rules. Silly, antiquated rules passed down from my great-grandmother Alara. Never leave a window uncovered after sunset. Always salt the thresholds on the new moon. And the most important one, under no circumstances were we to spend a night in the old family cabin alone. It was just quirky tradition, I thought, the kind of superstition that lingers in old families. I was wrong. It was a warning. The cabin came to me after my grandmother's passing. A weathered wooden structure nestled deep in the pine forests of the Pacific Northwest, left to me with a single, heavily underlined condition in the will: sell it. Do not stay. But I was 26, drowning in student debt, and the idea of a free property, however remote, was a lifeline. I saw a fixer-upper, a future airman, a blank slate. I drove up on a crisp October Friday, my car packed with cleaning supplies and a naive sense of adventure. The setting was picturesque, almost painfully so. Crimson and gold leaves carpeted the winding driveway. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. But as I pulled up, 3 details snagged on my subconscious like brambles. First, every window, grimy as they were, had thick, black shutters bolted securely from the outside. Second, the front door wasn't just locked. It had a heavy iron bar laid across it, held by brackets I'd only seen in medieval castles. Third, and most oddly, the ancient birch tree beside the porch was strung with what looked like tiny, weathered bones, and feathers. A child's wind chime turned macabre. I chuckled, dismissing it as more of my family's flair for the dramatic. The first night was about reclaiming the space. I wrestled the iron bar off it was shockingly heavy, and the shutters, which groaned in protest. I aired out the musty smell, the scent of old wood smoke and time. The interior was a time capsule of faded floral wallpaper and dark oak. I found my grandmother's journal in a kitchen drawer, filled with her elegant script detailing mundane things, weather, recipes, and on every page, a small, ritualistic notation like salted or warded. I tossed it aside. As dusk fell, the forest silence became absolute, a thick blanket that muffled even the sound of my own breathing. I felt a prickle of isolation, but I chalked it up to being a city girl. I went to bed in my grandmother's old room, the iron bedframe squeaking under a new sleeping bag. I was jolted awake at 3:07 a.m. by a sound. Not a bang or a scream, but a scratching. A slow, deliberate scrape of something hard against the cabin's outer wall, starting near the base and dragging upwards. I froze, my heart a trapped bird. Animal, I thought. A bear, a raccoon. The scratching circled the cabin, then it stopped directly beneath my window. I heard a wet, snuffling sound, like a dog with a congested nose, but deeper, more resonant. It inhaled audibly, as if sniffing the very wood of the wall. I didn't move a muscle until the first gray light of dawn bleached the sky. The moment the sun was fully up, the forest came alive with birdsong, and the night's terror felt silly, a product of an overactive imagination. I inspected the perimeter and found no tracks, no broken branches, just soft, undisturbed moss. The second night, I decided to be proactive. I lit every candle I could find, trying to banish the oppressive dark. I even laughed at myself, playing into the spooky atmosphere. But then the rules came back to me. Almost mockingly, I sprinkled a line of table salt across the windowsill of the bedroom, a tribute to Grandma. That night the scratching returned, but it was faster, more frantic. And with it came a new sound, a whisper. It wasn't in the room, it seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, a susurrus of many voices speaking just below the threshold of comprehension. One word, however, broke through the chorus, clear and cold as ice. Ava. It knew my name. I pulled the covers over my head, a child's defense, and for a moment I swear I felt the temperature in the room plummet. I heard the salt on the windowsill sizzle like it was being scattered by an unseen force. The whispering ceased abruptly. I spent the rest of the night clutching my grandmother's journal to my chest like a talisman. By day, I was a mess of nerves, but the sunny, serene forest mocked my fear. I knew I had to leave, but my car, my perfectly reliable sedan, wouldn't start. The engine turned over with a sickly whine and died. My phone had no signal. I was trapped. It was then in the daylight that I truly studied the journal. It wasn't a diary, it was a ledger, a record of maintenance. The rituals weren't superstition, they were upkeep. Entries spoke of the quiet ones, the things in the birch and the bargain. My great-grandmother Alara hadn't built a cabin in the woods. She had built a containment. The land was theirs, and the cabin was a toll house. We maintained the barriers, and in return, they stayed in the woods. My grandmother hadn't been afraid of the dark. She had been afraid of the things that lived in it, the things the cabin kept at bay. And I had undone her work. I had opened the shutters. I had broken the salt lines. I had invited the quiet in. Okay, before I get to the worst of it, let me ask you guys something. We all have those little family quirks, right? An old saying, a weird tradition you never question. What's the strangest one from your family? Tell me in the comments. Maybe we can figure out if any of us are secretly guarding against ancient horrors. That third night, I prepared. I rehung the shutters from the inside as best I could, my hands trembling. I used every grain of salt, every spice in the pantry to trace lines at every window and door, reciting phrases from the journal I barely understood. I lit candles and sat in the center of the living room, the journal open on my lap. The false safety id felt after the salt sizzled was gone. I knew it was coming. Dread pooled in my stomach, cold and heavy. The assault began not with a whisper, but with silence. The usual night sounds of the forest vanished, creating a vacuum of sound. Then the cabin itself began to groan, timbers straining as if under immense pressure. The whispers returned, but they were no longer just in the walls. They were in my head, overlapping, insistent, promising thingspeace if I stopped fighting, terrible visions if I did not. The candle flame stretched tall and thin, then guttered low, casting frantic, jumping shadows that seemed to move independently. In those shadows I saw shapes, elongated, spindly-limbed things that skittered along the edges of the room. The smell of ozone and wet soil filled the air, choking and thick. I thought the door would hold. It was solid oak, banded with iron. But the thing outside didn't try the door. The scratching focused on a single, uncovered corner of the bedroom window where id missed a shutter hook. I heard the pop of old glass cracking. A long, black, segmented finger, glistening with something dark, curled through the hole, probing, searching for the latch. It was utterly, biologically wrong. I screamed, hurling a heavy bookend. It connected with a sickening crunch, and the finger withdrew with a shriek that was half rage, half rending metal. For a moment there was quiet. I dared to hope id heard it, driven it back. I slumped against the wall, sobbing with relief. This was the false safety, the cruelest trick fear plays. The silence lasted just long enough for my breathing to slow. Then, from the fireplace hearth that hadn't been used in decades came a cascade of soot, and a sound of something heavy dragging itself down the chimney. It landed in the grate with a soft, wet thud. I couldn't see it clearly, just a hunched, shadowy mass that absorbed the faint light. But I could hear its breathing, a ragged, bubbling inhale and exhale. And I could feel its attention fix on me, a physical weight of malevolence. It was inside. The barriers had failed. The climax wasn't a fight, it was a transaction. The thing didn't lunge. It spoke, its voice the sound of roots breaking stone. The door is open. The ward is broken. The bargain requires a keeper. It wasn't here to kill me. It was here to enforce the contract my family had forgotten. The true horror wasn't in being consumed. It was in being conscripted. I had two choices: become the new warden, the maintainer of this terrible prison, or leave the cabin unprotected and let whatever lived in these woods walk free into the world. My grandmother's fear hadn't been for herself. It had been for the day the responsibility would fall to someone who didn't believe. That day was today. I still live in the cabin. I keep the shutters bolted. I renew the salt lines every new moon. I hang new bones on the birch tree. The whispers are quieter now, a constant background hum. Sometimes at night I hear the scratching, testing my resolve. My family's rituals weren't madness. They were the instructions for a life sentence. I understand them perfectly now. And the most chilling part is, I think they can sense when I am getting lonely, because last night the whispers didn't just say my name. They whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for listening to my story. If you felt that chill down your spine, you're not alone. Please help this channel keep the lights on and the shutters closed by hitting that like button and subscribing for more tales from the dark. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. And remember, sometimes the oldest family rules are the only things standing between us and what waits in the dark." Story 6. What my grandfather left in the basement. I should have listened when they said some family histories are better left buried. My name is Deb, and I am the last person who should have been trusted with a key. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, the lawyer's voice dry and precise as he informed me that my reclusive grandfather, a man I'd met exactly twice in my life, had passed away and left me everything. Everything amounted to a crumbling, 3-story Victorian house on a forgotten street at the edge of town, and the contents therein. The inheritance felt less like a gift and more like a debt finally called due. I arrived at the house on a damp, gray afternoon, the sky the color of old bruises. The air smelled of wet earth and decaying leaves, a scent that clung to the back of the throat. The house loomed, its windows like vacant eyes, the paint peeling in long, sorrowful strips. The key, cold and heavy in my hand, turned with a scream of protesting metal. The foyer was a tomb of dust and silence, filled with sheet-draped furniture that cast long, distorted shadows in the weak light filtering through grimy windows. It was cold, a deep marrow chill that the October afternoon couldn't explain. Two details caught my eye immediately, subtle hooks in the fabric of normalcy. First, every mirror in the hallway was turned to face the wall. Second, a trail of fine, gray powder like ashelled from the foot of the grand staircase down the hall towards the kitchen, as if something had been dragged. I spent the first few hours just walking through the rooms, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. The place was a museum of a life I never knew. Faded photographs of stern-faced ancestors, strange collections of river-smoothed stones arranged in spirals on windowsills, and books in languages I couldn't identify filled the shelves. It was unsettling, but in a quiet, melancholic way. I told myself it was just the grief of a stranger, the weight of abandoned things. I decided to start my inventory in the living room, pulling dust sheets off monstrous old furniture. That's when I found my grandfather's journal, tucked into the crevice of a wingback chair. The leather was cracked, the pages brittle. Most entries were mundane, whether reports, grocery lists, notes on the overgrown garden. But then, about halfway through, the tone shifted. The writing became frantic, jagged. "It is in the walls again," one entry reads. "It whispers from the grates, it asks for names. I have given it all but my own." Another, a week later, the salt holds it at the threshold. For now, it learns, it adapts. The final entry, dated the day before he died, was a single, shaky sentence. "The door in the basement is not a door." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. Salt. The gray powder trail. It wasn't ash. I followed the trail, my heart hammering against my ribs. It led me past the kitchen to a narrow, unpainted door I hadn't noticed before. The door to the basement. The salt line was thick across the threshold, but it was disturbed in the center as if something had broken through. The door was slightly ajar. From the darkness below came a sound so faint I thought I imagined it. A soft, wet scraping, like a damp cloth being dragged across concrete. I slammed the door shut, my breath coming in short gasps. I spent the rest of the day fortifying the kitchen, the only room with a solid lock on the door. I tried to call a friend, but my phone showed no signal, though it had full bars on the street. The landline was dead, a hollow hiss on the line. As night fell, the house began to speak. It started with the pipes, a rhythmic knocking that traveled from the basement walls up to the second floor. Then came the whispers. Not from any one direction, but from the vents, from the space between the floorboards, a sibilant, multi-voiced murmur just below the threshold of understanding. It sounded like it was trying to form words. So, have you ever been in a place that just felt sentient? Like the building itself was aware of you, and it wasn't happy you were there. Comment below. I read every single one. I spent a sleepless night in the kitchen, a butcher knife on the table, listening to the symphony of creaks and whispers. By dawn, the sounds had ceased. The gray morning light made everything seem ordinary, foolish. My fear of the night before felt like a childish panic. The salt was just salt. The whispers were the wind in old pipes. The journal was the ramblings of an old, sick man. I felt a flush of embarrassment. I needed to be practical. I decided the first order of business was to check the circuit breaker, which was undoubtedly in the basement. I had to face it. Armed with a flashlight and a courage I didn't feel, I opened the basement door. The smell hit me first: damp soil, rust, and something sweetly organic, like spoiled fruit. The stairs groaned under my weight. The basement was a labyrinth of brick pillars and cobweb junk. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, catching on old tools, a broken washing machine, stacks of mildewed National Geographics. And there on the far wall was the door. It was smaller than a normal door, about 5 feet high, made of dark, iron-bound oak. It looked ancient, and it was slightly ajar. No handle, just a heavy iron ring. The concrete floor in front of it was scrubbed clean, unlike the surrounding filth. This was it, the door in the basement. I took a step closer. The air grew colder. My breath plumed in the flashlight beam. I saw then that the doorframe wasn't wood or stone. It was made of dozens of river stones, identical to the ones upstairs, cemented together. They were arranged in that same spiral pattern. As I stared, a faint, phosphorescent green light seemed to pulse from the cracks between the stones, once, twice, then gone. A rational part of my brain screamed that this was a trick of the light, a fungal growth, anything. But the primal part, the part that recognized a threshold, told me to run. I backed away, my legs weak. As I turned, my flashlight beam swept across the wall beside the stairs. Etched into the concrete in what looked like a frantic, jagged script were names. Dozens of them, family names, my father's name, my name, D.E.V. At the bottom, freshly scratched as if with a nail, was my grandfather's name. It wasn't a signature, it was a list, a ledger. I stumbled up the stairs, slammed the basement door, and pushed a heavy sideboard in front of it. The false safety of daylight was gone. This was real. I had to leave. I would pack a bag, get in my car, and never look back. I ran to the foyer, wrenched open the front door, and stopped. The world outside was gone. Not dark, not foggy. Gone. A seamless, silent, pitch-black void pressed against the doorway, as if the house existed in a bubble of reality. There was no street, no trees, no sound of wind or distant cars, just an absolute hungry nothingness. I reached a trembling hand out. The air at the threshold was solid, cold, and slightly yielding like a membrane. I pushed, but it pushed back. The house had sealed itself. I was trapped. The whispers began again, louder now, coalescing from every shadow. Dev, they sighed, a chorus of dry leaves and breaking bones. Stay. Name your name. I backed away from the door, my mind fracturing. That's when the scratching started, not from the basement door, from inside the walls. A slow, deliberate scraping moving from the foyer up the staircase, following me as I retreated to the sealed kitchen. It was in the walls. It was learning the layout of its cage, and I was inside with it. The climax came an hour later. The kitchen light flickered and died. The flashlight batteries drained to nothing in seconds. In the perfect, suffocating dark, the only sound was the scraping, now right behind the plasterboard next to the fridge. Then a new sound, a soft, wet drip, drip, drip onto the linoleum. A coppery, meaty smell filled the air. I pressed myself into a corner, my eyes straining. A faint green glow, the same as from the basement door, began to seep through a crack in the wall. It illuminated a shape forming in the darkness, not a full form, but an impression, like a man made of shifting shadow and dripping stone. It had no face, just a deeper darkness where a face should be. It didn't move towards me. It simply unfolded from the wall itself, its substance staining the plaster with damp and that sickly phosphorescence. The whispers became a single clear voice, my grandfather's voice, layered with 1,000 others. It needs an anchor, it said, the words dripping with sorrow and a terrible hunger. A name to hold the door shut. My name is spent. It learned it. It always learns. It needs a new name to bind it. The realization was an ice pick to my soul. The salt, the turned mirrors, the stones they weren't to keep it in the basement. They were to keep it from learning, from claiming the name of the person in the house. My grandfather had lived here, a prisoner, giving it the names of everyone he remembered to stall for time. And now it had mine. It had learned dead. The thing, the entity from behind the knot door, took a shuddering step forward. The green light pulsed, and I saw that the dripping wasn't water. It was a dark, viscous fluid that sizzled where it hit the floor. It reached for me, not with hands, but with tendrils of cold, palpable shadow. I had nothing left. No weapons, no light, no escape. So I did the only thing I could think of. I closed my eyes and I screamed. I screamed every name I could remember from the journal, from the photographs on the walls. Names of ancestors I'd never known. Names of old teachers, friends, fictional characters so torn of words to drown out the one it wanted. The thing hesitated. The whispering chorus stuttered, confused by the cacophony. In that split second of confusion, I didn't run towards an exit. I ran towards the basement. I heaved the sideboard aside, flung open the door, and charged down into the deeper dark towards the source. The cold was physical, a slap in the face. The green glow from the stone-framed door was brighter now, pulsating like a sick heart. I could see the door was wider open, a crack of impenetrable blackness behind it. From that blackness, I felt a pull, a vast, silent inhale. The thing from the kitchen was flowing down the stairs behind me, a waterfall of whispering shadow. I didn't stop. I threw myself at the little oak door, not to open it further, but to slam it shut. My hands gripped the iron ring. The metal was freezing, burning my skin. I pulled with all my strength. The door resisted as if the darkness itself was holding it open. From behind me, the shadow thing wailed, a sound of broken glass and rage. I planted my feet, thought of nothing, and heaved. With a sound like a mountain sighing, the door slammed shut. The green light in the stones died instantly. The whispering stopped. Basement was silent and utterly, normally dark. I collapsed, shaking, my hands blistered and numb. I don't know how long I sat there. Eventually, I crawled back upstairs. The front door was just a door again, showing the overgrown yard in the gray afternoon. I left that house and never went back. I had it sealed, the basement filled with concrete by a crew who asked no questions. I burned the journal. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is too quiet, I hear it. Not a whisper, a knock. A single, polite, and very patient knock from inside the bedroom wall. And I know it's not asking for a name anymore. It's learned how to knock. And one day, it'll be tired enough or lonely enough to knock back. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you felt that chill down your spine, you know what to dosmesh that like button. It helps more than you know. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a tale from the dark. And tell me in the comments, what's the one family heirloom you would never, ever bring into your home? Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe for more horror stories.